Why does that say 317 when your report says 305? Daniel Mercer asked. Lily Bennett's trembling finger hovered over the glowing timestamp on the silver hearing device sealed inside his clear evidence bag. Dana Whitmore reached for it, her polished smile gone. That recording has nothing to do with this. Dan pulled the bag beyond her hand and turned it toward Principal Elaine Foster, who had just stepped into the hallway. Lily swallowed hard. I didn't leave. 3 hours earlier, the second-floor corridor at Westbridge smelled of floor wax, warm dust, and the faint machine oil clinging to Dan's navy work shirt. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he pushed his maintenance cart past the academic competition rooms, checking loose chair legs and door latches before parents arrived. He moved quietly, as he always did, tightening what could be tightened before anyone noticed it had begun to fail. At the far end of the hall, Noah stood with several sixth graders, pretending not to see his father kneeling beside a row of folding chairs. Dan noticed, but he said nothing. He only tested the metal support beneath the last seat and heard a thin scrape against the tile. Too light to be a screw, too sharp to be a coin. His old flashlight caught a flash of silver beneath the chair. He reached for it, then stopped. The object had a molded school asset number and a tiny blue accessibility mark. Dan pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves from his cart before touching it. A few doors away, voices rose and fell behind the competition room. Not shouting. Something worse. Calm adult voices pressing a child toward an answer. Signing only confirms that you received the report, Martin Hale said as the door opened. Lily stood at a narrow table, her shoulders rigid, one hand wrapped around a pen. Her mother was beside her, asking why the meeting had started when Lily's hearing device was still missing. Dana Whitmore answered with practiced warmth. We're trying to prevent this from becoming more upsetting than it needs to be. Dan looked down at the silver device in his palm, then toward Lily. He placed it in a clear property bag, wrote the location beneath row C, seat 14, and marked the time he found it. Dana saw what he was doing. You can leave that with me, Mr. Mercer. Dan pressed the adhesive seal closed. I'll log it through intake. Martin stepped into the doorway. This is an academic matter. You don't need to involve yourself. Dan did not argue. He had learned that people revealed more when silence forced them to fill it. He wrote the device number on the chain of custody label while Lily watched from behind Martin's shoulder. Her eyes moved from the bag to the report in front of her. Then she slowly shook her head.
Dana's smile tightened.
She failed to follow the final instruction. We have statements from staff. Lily lifted one hand and pointed toward the bag. Blue table, she said. The words were soft, but Dana's head snapped toward her. Martin slid the report closer and placed the pen beside Lily's fingers. We can discuss details after you sign. Dan looked at the paper. The printed line stated that Lily had left the competition area at 3:05 p.m. after refusing 2 verbal instructions. He looked back at the device. Its dark screen flickered once beneath the plastic, then came alive. A small waveform pulsed beside the word session active. Underneath it, the timestamp read 3:17 p.m. Dana crossed the hallway faster than her heels should have allowed. Her hand rose toward the bag. Dan moved it out of reach. Give that to me now, she said, still smiling for the parents watching through the glass. I didn't ask what was on it, Dan replied. I asked who signs for it. Martin's face hardened. Lily let the pen fall. It struck the table with a dry click that seemed louder than every voice in the corridor. Then Dana made the mistake Dan would later write word for word in his black maintenance notebook. She stared at the sealed device and said, That recording has nothing to do with this. No one had told her it contained a recording. For 1 second, no one answered Dana. The word recording seemed to hang beneath the fluorescent lights, sharper than the smell of floor wax and warmer dust. Daniel Mercer kept the sealed bag steady against his chest while Lily stared at Dana. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. It's a school-issued device, Dana said. It may contain private data. Then it needs a documented handoff, Dan replied. Mr. Mercer, return to your assignment. Martin Hale spoke gently, almost patiently. as if correcting an employee who had misunderstood something simple. His eyes dropped to Dan's faded navy shirt, the frayed cuff near his wrist, and the maintenance badge clipped above his name. Behind the glass door, two parents exchanged a glance. One leaned close to the other and whispered, "Why is the janitor involved?" Dan heard it. So did Noah, standing farther down the hall with his backpack hanging from one shoulder. The boy's face tightened before he looked away. Dan did not turn toward him. He placed the sealed bag on top of his cart, close enough to protect but visible to everyone, then set both hands flat beside it. "Signing only means Lily received the report," Martin said. "This does not need to become adversarial. She needs to understand it first," Dan said. "That is not your determination." The wheels of Dan's cart gave a soft metal creak as he pulled a small dry erase board from beneath a folded drop cloth. He wiped away an old note about a leaking faucet, uncapped a marker, and wrote Martin's last sentence in slow block letters. Then he turned the board toward Lily. Her eyes moved across the words. Her shoulders lowered by less than an inch. Dana's smile returned, polished and careful. "We appreciate your concern, Mr. Mercer, but Lily's auditory processing challenges can make stressful moments difficult to reconstruct accurately." Lily looked at her mother. "I heard her," Dana continued as though the child had not spoken. "We are trying to protect her from the embarrassment of prolonging this." "I heard blue table," Lily said. The marker squeaked in Dan's hand as he wrote the words beneath Martin's sentence. "Blue table." Martin slid the report closer to Lily and turned the signature line toward her. The paper made a dry scraping sound across the laminate. "Refusing to sign may be documented as refusal to cooperate," he said. Lily's mother inhaled sharply. "She is 13, and we are giving her the same accountability we give every student,"
Dana replied.
Her voice remained soft enough for the parents behind the glass to hear only kindness. Dan looked at the report. The phrase "student failed to comply" was printed in bold near the top. Below it, the document stated that Lily had ignored 2 verbal instructions before leaving the competition area at 3:05. He glanced at the sealed device. The tiny screen had gone dark again, but the handwritten time on his chain of custody label remained visible through the plastic. 3:17 p.m. Principal Elaine Foster stepped closer, her gaze moving from the report to the bag, then to the board in Lily's hands. "Was an accessible written summary provided before this meeting began?" she asked. Martin answered too quickly. "The report itself is the summary." Elaine did not challenge him, but her eyes paused on the blank accommodation section at the bottom of the page. Dana folded her hands. Lily was told twice where to place her project. She chose not to follow the final instruction. "When was the second instruction?" Lily's mother asked. Dana's attention shifted toward the parents behind the glass. "During the transition." "What time?" Dan asked. Martin turned toward him. "You are not part of this review." Dan capped the marker. "No, sir." He moved the board closer to Lily anyway. The action was small, quiet, and impossible to describe as insubordination without admitting why the board was needed. Noah watched from the end of the corridor, shame and uncertainty pulling his mouth into a hard line. One of the boys beside him murmured, "Your dad thinks he runs the school." Noah said nothing. Dan saw his son's reflection in the glass but kept his eyes on Lily. She set the pen down. "I want to hear the instruction again," she said. Martin's professional expression tightened at the corners. "There is no requirement to replay classroom directions during a disciplinary conference." "Then write that down," Dan said, turning the board toward him. A silence spread across the table. Elaine's gaze returned to the report, this time lingering on the sentence about 2 verbal instructions. Dana had said Lily was told twice. The report described only 1 instruction with no time, no wording, and no record of how the second message had been made accessible. Then Dana reached for the sealed bag again and said, almost under her breath, "We need that device cleared before anyone misinterprets what it captured." Dan looked at Dana's hand hovering over the sealed bag. "Cleared by whom?" he asked. "Technology Services," she said, "to protect the student." Then technology services can sign for it. Dana's smile thinned, but before she could answer, Elaine Foster raised one hand. The principal did not defend Dan or accuse Dana. She only said the device would remain sealed until the proper office opened in the morning. Dan nodded once, placed the clear bag on the upper shelf of his cart, and rolled it away while the tiny handwritten time, 3:17 p.m., faced outward beneath the fluorescent light. No one thanked him. Martin's voice followed him down the hall. Mr. Mercer, expect an email regarding your refusal to follow direction. Dan kept walking. The wheels clicked over the seams in the tile, one after another, steady as a clock. At the end of the corridor, Noah waited beside the drinking fountain with his backpack pulled tight against one shoulder. Are we leaving? He asked. In a minute. You said we'd get burgers. I know. Noah glanced back toward Lily and her mother. What if they fire you? Dan stopped beside the maintenance cart. For a moment, his thumb rested against the worn metal edge of his old flashlight. The one his wife had given him before the hospital visits became longer than the days between them. He did not mention the rent envelope on the kitchen counter or the red notice from the electric company folded beneath it. Then we'll figure out the next thing, he said. Noah looked unconvinced. He was 12, old enough to understand that adults sometimes said that when they had no answer. Dan reached into his lunch bag and found the sandwich he had saved for the ride home. Lily's mother stood a few yards away, rubbing her forehead while Lily watched people's mouths and caught only pieces of what they were saying. Dan handed the sandwich and an unopened bottle of water to her. You've been here since lunch, he said. We're fine. Please. She hesitated before taking them. Noah watched the sandwich leave his father's hand. His stomach gave a quiet growl neither of them acknowledged. Dana passed behind them carrying a leather folder. You're very kind, Mr. Mercer, she said, in the tone people used when kindness meant naive. But getting personally involved can blur professional boundaries. Dan closed the empty lunch bag. She can't hear the meeting. Dana's eyes moved toward Lily, then away. Her mother can explain it later. Dan said nothing. He pushed the cart toward the nurse's office, where the lights were already off except for a small lamp above the medicine cabinet. The nurse had gone home, but the evening aide was finishing paperwork. Dan explained that Lily's school-issued hearing device had been secured and asked whether a temporary transmitter kit was available. He did not ask to operate it himself. He waited while the aide checked the cabinet, signed it out, and replaced 2 weak batteries. The plastic case smelled faintly of alcohol wipes. When they returned, Dan set the kit on the table in front of Lily rather than placing it in her hands without permission. The aide connected it. Lily's expression changed when her mother spoke again. Not dramatically, just a small release around the eyes as sound returned with less effort. Elaine saw it from the doorway. She also saw the blank accommodation section on the report still waiting for a signature. But she said only, "Thank you for locating the backup unit." As though thanking Dan for finding a mop, Dana checked her watch. Now that everyone can participate, perhaps we can finish. Lily looked at the report, then at the sealed device on Dan's cart. Not without hearing what happened, she said. Dan carried the bag to the property desk, but the clerk had already locked the main cabinet. He filled out the intake form anyway, wrote the asset number twice, photographed the seal, and signed across the adhesive strip so any opening would break his name in half. Because the public drawer had no camera coverage, he placed the bag inside the maintenance office locker directly beneath a ceiling camera and recorded the locker number in his black notebook. Martin's warning email arrived before Dan finished. Failure to comply with supervisory instruction. Possible interference in a student matter. Formal review pending. Dan read it once, then turned his phone face down. On the device screen beneath the plastic, a faint line appeared, Auto archive pending. Dana had treated his careful handling as stubbornness, but the record he had created, every signature, every time, every hand that had not touched the bag, was becoming the first thing standing between the truth and whoever wanted the device cleared before morning. By 7:30 the next morning, the email accusing Dan Mercer of interference had already been forwarded to Principal Elaine Foster, Human Resources, and the district office. The subject line glowed on her monitor while rain tapped softly against the narrow windows of Westbridge's administrative wing. Dana Whitmore sat across from her in a cream-colored blazer, hands folded over a leather portfolio. Martin Hale stood near the filing cabinet with the posture of a man presenting a routine correction. He removed school property from the designated intake area. He placed it under camera coverage. He refused a direct instruction. Elaine looked through the glass wall toward the second-floor corridor, where Dan was replacing a cracked ceiling tile before students arrived. His navy uniform was dusted white at one shoulder. From a distance, he looked exactly like what Martin's report described, an employee who had stepped outside his role. "Bring him in," Elaine said. Dan entered 5 minutes later carrying his black notebook and nothing else. He remained standing until Elaine pointed to the chair. The office smelled of coffee, wet wool, and the lemon cleaner used on the conference table. Dana offered him a sympathetic smile. "No one is questioning your intentions." Martin slid a printed copy of the warning toward him. "But good intentions do not authorize access to student records." "I didn't access the device," Dan said. "You observed its screen, through a sealed bag, and then documented private information." Dan opened his notebook but did not push it across the table. "I documented time, location, asset number, and custody." Elaine watched his hands. "No checking, no defensive gestures." Just one thumb resting against the edge of the paper as though he were holding a loose part in place. "Why did you check the hallway service log this morning?" she asked. Dan looked at her. "Because Ms. Whitmore said the device may have been there before the competition."
Dana nodded.
"That remains possible. Can I ask one question?" Dan said. Martin exhaled through his nose. "This is not an investigation. What time was the hallway cleared before the event?" The room slowed. Elaine turned slightly toward the facilities binder on the side table. Dan did not reach for it. He waited while her assistant retrieved the digital service log and rotated the screen toward them. Row C, second floor academic wing, had been inspected and swept at 2:40 p.m. Dan's employee number appeared beside the entry, followed by a timestamp from the building system. Dana leaned forward. "That only proves the device was not visible during a general cleaning." "That's right," Dan said. "It doesn't prove when it fell." His refusal to overstate the clue made Elaine look at him again. Martin tapped the warning letter. "Then this changes nothing." Dan took out his old flashlight and placed it on the table, not as evidence but as explanation. "The chair support was loose. I checked under the seat by hand. There was nothing there at 2:40. Rainwater threaded down the glass behind Dana, bending the gray morning light across the polished tabletop. Elaine opened the competition report. Lily had supposedly left the room at 3:05 p.m. The sealed device, still locked in the maintenance office, had displayed 3:17 p.m. "The device clock could be wrong," Dana said. "Assistive equipment drifts. Batteries fail. Students change settings." The explanation was reasonable enough that Elaine wrote it in the margin. Then Dan asked, "Does that model set its own time?" Dana answered before anyone else could. "It syncs when the session starts." Silence settled for half a breath. Elaine lifted her eyes. "How do you know that?" Dana's smile did not disappear, but it became more careful. "I coordinate accessibility. Services. I am familiar with the equipment." Martin moved closer to the table. "Which is precisely why this belongs with trained staff, not maintenance." Elaine nodded, but she did not close the report. She called the district technology specialist and asked whether the device clock could drift. The answer came through the speakerphone, thin and crackling beneath the rain. The unit synchronized automatically with the school server whenever the remote microphone connected. Manual time changes were disabled. Dana crossed one ankle over the other. Then perhaps the session remained open after the incident. "Maybe," Elaine said. She still did not look convinced of anything beyond the need for caution. Dan returned to work. Before leaving, he stopped at the administrative doorway and looked back. Was there a bell at 3:17? Elaine frowned. The bell schedule was displayed on a laminated card beside her phone. The afternoon passing bell had sounded at exactly 3:17 p.m. Dan said nothing more. He walked downstairs, checked the archive building log, and found the matching system entry. Bell circuit activated, second floor speakers confirmed. Then his phone vibrated with a security alert from the device management system. At 7:12 that morning, someone had attempted to open Lily Bennett's archived session from the desktop computer in Dana Whitmore's office. The security alert reached Elaine Foster before Dan finished reading it a second time. By 8:15, the silver hearing device sat unopened in the center of the conference table, still sealed inside the clear bag with Dan's signature crossing the adhesive strip. Dana Whitmore sat beside the district technology specialist, her face composed, while Martin Hale stood near the door with his arms folded. Lily and her mother were given seats across from them. The login attempt may have been automatic, Dana said. School systems generate background requests all the time. From your desktop? Elaine asked. My office computer is used by several staff members. Dan remained near the wall in his Navy maintenance shirt. His black notebook closed at his side. He had not been invited to offer an opinion. He had been invited because his name was on the seal. The technology specialist placed a small camera above the table and read the asset number aloud. Before we access any stored session, Elaine said, we are going to establish what each person remembers without allowing the device to influence the answer. Dana's smile returned. That seems fair. Lily's mother reached for her daughter's hand. You don't have to prove anything. Lily looked at the paper Elaine placed in front of her. I know. Dana and Lily were moved to opposite ends of the room. Each received the same question in writing. What was the final instruction given before the project was submitted? Lily held the pen tightly for several seconds, then wrote in careful block letters. Place the model on the blue table. Dana finished faster. Her page read, place the model on the red table near the exit. Martin gave a quiet sigh, as if the matter had just resolved itself. There is the confusion. Dan looked at the 2 pages but said nothing. Elaine asked Dana whether she had a written copy of the final instruction. Dana opened her leather folder and produced a printed sheet with a red table direction highlighted in yellow. This was distributed to staff. The paper looked clean, except for 2 narrow punctures near the upper corner where an older staple had once been removed. A new staple held it to the incident report. Dan's eyes rested there. He had spent years removing damaged work orders from binders and knew the difference between holes made before a page entered a file and holes made with the rest of the packet. Mr. Mercer? Elaine said. You're looking at something. Dan did not touch the page. Was that sheet in the report when it was first created? Martin's jaw shifted. What possible relevance could that have? The old staple holes don't line up with the new staple. Dana glanced down. Documents are reorganized constantly. That could be all it is, Dan said. His restraint made the room quieter than an accusation would have. Elaine slowly placed her palm on the report. Check the print metadata. Dana's smile stayed in place, but her fingers tightened around the cap of her pen. The specialist entered the document code printed in the footer. The air conditioner clicked on above them, and for a few seconds its low mechanical hum was the only sound in the room. Then the specialist turned the laptop toward Elaine. The red table instruction had been printed at 4:21 p.m., more than an hour after the competition ended. Lily's mother covered her mouth. Lily looked down at her own answer as if seeing it return to her from somewhere far away. Martin spoke first. A replacement copy could have been printed later. Yes, Elaine said. It could. Dana leaned forward. Which is why we should not let technical details create a false impression. The instruction was updated during the event. Was the update given through Lily's remote microphone? Elaine asked.
Dana paused.
It was announced to the room. That wasn't the question, Dan said quietly. Martin turned toward him. You are here to verify custody, not conduct this meeting.
Dan nodded.
Then verify the file before anyone plays it. The technology specialist looked at him. Dan pointed to the sealed bag. Make a read-only copy. Record the checksum. If the first 8 seconds help Lily, that still doesn't give us permission to get careless with the rest. Elaine studied him for a moment, then instructed the specialist to do exactly that. The seal was photographed, opened on camera, and the session copied without altering the original. A code appeared on the screen. Dan wrote it in his notebook and compared it with the specialist's record. Only then did Elaine approve playback of the first 8 seconds. A soft rustle filled the room, followed by the scrape of a table leg. Then Dana's recorded voice, unmistakable and calm, came through the speaker. When you finish, take it to the blue table. A chair stopped moving near the door. Martin's hand fell away from the report. Dana did not deny the voice was hers. She folded her hands and said, "That was before the safety adjustment." Lily lifted her eyes. The fear had not left her face, but something inside it had loosened. "I didn't forget the red table," she said. "There wasn't a red table when she spoke to me." Elaine looked at the waveform still stretching across the laptop screen. The first 8 seconds had proved Lily remembered correctly, but farther along the file, 9 minutes of audio remained marked beneath a remote micro gap that began immediately after an incoming call to Dana Whitmore's phone. The 9-minute gap on the screen did not look dramatic. It was only a pale section of waveform beneath the timestamp session, a quiet break between 2 clusters of sound. But once the technology specialist opened the connection log beside it, the room changed. The remote microphone had not failed. Its battery remained above 80%. The hearing device stayed paired to the school system. The only thing missing was the teacher's signal. Elaine Foster leaned closer to the laptop. "Play from the call." The specialist moved the cursor to the marked point. A phone vibrated against a hard surface. Dana's recorded voice answered with the careful brightness she used around parents. "Patricia, the judging is still in progress." A woman's voice came faintly through the speaker. Most of the words were blurred by distance, but one sentence carried clearly enough. "My son followed what was posted, and your donor committee was told this would be handled fairly." Dana glanced toward the conference room camera. "This is a private conversation." "The recording was made through the school-issued accessibility system," the specialist said. "It captured what the student's device was receiving from the room microphone." Dana's fingers closed around her phone. "Then stop playback until counsel reviews it." Elaine did not look at Dan. She looked at Lily. "Did you hear any new instruction after the blue table direction?" Lily shook her head. "No." "Did you see anyone move the signs?" "I was working." Her answer was small and exact. The answer of a 13-year-old who knew only what had been in front of her. The recording continued. Fabric brushed against the microphone. A table leg scraped across the floor. Dana's voice moved farther from the receiver. "Everyone, place your finished models on the red table by the exit." The remote micro line remained flat. Dan watched the timestamps instead of Dana's face. The device had stayed connected, but the microphone transmitting directly to Lily had been muted for the entire announcement. "Could that happen accidentally?" Elaine asked. The specialist nodded once. "Yes, but the mute control is physical. Someone had to press it."
Dana exhaled slowly.
"The room announcement was for everyone. I had no reason to single Lily out." Dan spoke without raising his voice. "That's the problem." Martin Hale stepped away from the wall. "Mr. Mercer, you are not qualified to interpret accessibility compliance." "No," Dan said. "But the log says the message reached everyone except the student who needed the microphone." The air conditioner stopped. In the sudden quiet, the soft electrical buzz from the laptop speakers seemed almost alive. Dana uncapped her pen, recapped it, then placed it beside the printed red table instruction. "This is being made to look intentional when it was a fast safety adjustment." Elaine turned to the specialist. "Was any written update pushed to Lily's device or tablet?" "No." "Was the change logged in the event notes?" "Not until 4:21 p.m. Dan opened his black notebook to the timeline he had drawn during the checksum process. He slid it toward Elaine, not toward Dana. 2:58. Blue table setup. 3:05 report says Lily left. 3:12 incoming call. 3:17 hallway bell. 4:21 red table instruction printed. The lines were plain, written in block letters with no accusation beside them. Elaine's hand rested on the page. Continue. The next recording segment began with Dana speaking in a lower voice. We need one clean version before the parents arrive. Martin answered from somewhere nearby. I'll change the wording. Don't write that the instruction changed. Write that the student failed to comply. Lily's mother gripped the edge of the table. Martin's face did not collapse. It hardened. That could be taken out of context. Then give us the context, Elaine said. He looked at Dana. Dana looked at the camera mounted above the conference table. Neither answered. The specialist opened the report audit history. The first saved version read, student followed original direction after instruction changed. 11 minutes later, under Martin's account, it had become, student failed to comply with repeated verbal direction. Elaine's expression altered, not with sympathy but with recognition. Pull the hallway footage from 3 to 3:25. The security archive loaded slowly, each file appearing as a gray block. Then the specialist frowned. Footage from 3:12 to 3:19 was missing. Martin moved quickly. The system overwrites corrupted segments. Dan looked toward the service terminal. Not 7-minute segments in the middle of an active archive. Martin's voice sharpened. You maintain doors and fixtures. And the camera service log. Dan entered the date and found a manual export recorded under Martin's electronic signature during the exact missing window. Elaine stood so abruptly her chair rolled backward and struck the credenza. For the first time, Dana's calm voice fractured. Elaine, this can still be handled internally. Elaine stared at the altered report, the muted microphone log, the missing footage, and the manual export bearing Martin's name. Then the district auditor called from the speakerphone and said the same phrase, student failed to comply, appeared in 3 earlier disciplinary files involving students with disabilities, each one edited after normal office hours. No one in the room spoke. By then, the truth was no longer small enough to remain behind a closed conference room door. By 6 o'clock that evening, every folding chair in the Westbridge High Auditorium faced the same stage where Lily Bennett's project had been displayed less than 24 hours earlier. The blue table stood beneath the left spotlight. The red table had been rolled beside the exit, its paper sign still taped crookedly to the front. Parents filled the center rows. Teachers lined the walls. The low hum of whispered speculation moved beneath the stage lights until Principal Elaine Foster stepped to the microphone and asked for silence. Dan Mercer entered through the side aisle with Noah beside him. His work shirt was clean but faded, and a pale line of ceiling dust remained near one cuff. He did not look like a man arriving to defeat anyone. He looked tired. Noah reached for his hand only once, then released it. When they reached the front row, Lily sat with her mother near the aisle, wearing the temporary hearing unit. When Dan passed, she gave him a small nod. Dana Whitmore stood at the podium in a dark blue suit, her expression composed beneath the white glare. Martin Hale sat behind her beside the district attorney and a representative from Student Services. Yesterday's incident has been distorted by incomplete information, Dana began. A last-minute safety concern required us to relocate student projects. Unfortunately, one student did not receive the revised direction clearly, and several employees acted beyond their assigned responsibilities. Her eyes moved toward Dan without naming him. No one intended harm. A few people in the rear rows murmured agreement. Dana rested one hand against the podium. I have spent 14 years advocating for students. I regret that a technical malfunction has been presented as discrimination. For a moment, it appeared the explanation might hold. A safety adjustment, a failed microphone, a maintenance worker who had misunderstood procedure. Martin opened a binder and displayed a printed facilities diagram showing the blue table near a blocked electrical outlet. The relocation was necessary, he said. The initial setup violated fire and safety clearance. Elaine did not interrupt. She remained seated at the side of the stage, watching the faces of the people who had changed their stories once the room became public. Dan looked at the diagram, then at the actual outlet beneath the curtain. "May I ask one question?" Martin's mouth tightened. "This is a district presentation, not an employee hearing." Elaine lifted her hand. "Ask it." Dan stood without approaching the stage. "When was the outlet reported blocked?" Martin looked down at the diagram. "During the event." Dan removed a folded service log from his black notebook. "The outlet passed inspection at 2:40. No obstruction was reported until 4:36. The whispering stopped near the front rows first, then farther back." Martin answered smoothly. "A table can be moved after an inspection." "Yes," Dan said. "But the blue table is visible in Rachel Kim's photo at 3:14. Elaine signaled to the projection booth. A photograph appeared on the auditorium screen. Lily beside her model, the blue table behind her, the outlet fully visible and unobstructed. The timestamp glowed in the lower corner. Dana did not flinch. That photograph was taken before the emergency adjustment. "The report says Lily refused instructions at 3:05, Elaine said. The room went still again. Dana turned toward her. The report time was approximate. That explanation landed harder than the first because it sounded possible. School reports often used rounded times. Parents shifted in their seats. Martin leaned toward the microphone. "An imprecise timestamp does not prove misconduct." Dan opened the evidence case placed beside Elaine's chair. Inside lay the silver hearing device, still tagged with the original chain of custody label. "No," he said, "but this device synchronized to the school server." The screen behind them changed to the remote microphone log. Blue table instruction at 3:02. Microphone muted at 3:12. Hallway bell captured at 3:17. The report still claimed Lily had left at 3:05. Lily's fingers tightened around her mother's hand. "That's the bell I heard," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the auditorium microphone near their row carried it across the room. Dana looked toward Lily with practiced concern. Memory can attach sounds to the wrong moment, especially during stress. Dan's jaw tightened, but his answer remained calm. "Then don't rely on her memory. Rely on the timestamps." Elaine placed the altered report beside the original audit record. The first version stated that Lily had followed the original direction after the instruction changed. The later version, saved under Martin's account, accused her of refusing repeated commands. Martin stood. "Draft language changes during review. That is normal. Not when the meaning reverses," Elaine said. The air seemed thinner beneath the stage lights. Dana stepped away from the podium and addressed the parents directly. "This is exactly why confidential matters should not be tried before an audience. A child's private recording is being used to damage careers." Dan looked at Lily before he answered. "Not to damage anyone. To stop the truth from being buried again." Elaine nodded to the projection booth. The screen went black. Then the district auditor carried a sealed envelope onto the stage, while the technology specialist connected the final untouched recording file to the auditorium system. Dana's face changed when she saw the file name, because it contained the missing 7 minutes Martin had exported from the hallway archive. The technology specialist pressed play. The auditorium speakers gave a soft click, then filled the room with the hollow sound of the second-floor hallway at 3:13 p.m. Distant shoes, a rolling cart, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. On the screen, the recovered camera footage showed the blue table still standing beneath the competition sign. Dana Whitmore entered the frame holding her phone. Martin Hale followed with a red paper placard tucked beneath his binder. Neither of them knew the hallway camera was still recording to its local backup drive. "Patricia wants Cole's project near the judges," Dana said. Martin glanced toward the competition room. "Then move the table." Lily already heard blue. "Mute the mic. We'll call it a safety change." Somewhere in the auditorium, a program slipped from someone's hand and landed flat against the floor. No one bent to pick it up. The footage continued. Dana reached through the classroom doorway and pressed the physical mute switch on Lily's remote microphone. Martin carried the red sign toward the exit, then stopped directly beneath the hallway camera and looked up. "That one seized the table." "Export the segment," Dana replied. "I'll fix the report." The image froze for half a second as Martin opened the security panel with his district access card. A timestamp appeared in the corner, 3:16 and 42 seconds p.m. Then the hallway bell sounded. Lily, visible through the open classroom door, turned toward the blue table with her project in both hands. At 3:17, she followed the only instruction she had received. The silver hearing device had not merely recorded a mistake. It had preserved the moment adults created one. The final audio played over the frozen image. Martin's voice came through clearly. "Write 305. That puts her refusal before the change." Dana answered, and removed the line saying she followed the original direction. The speakers went silent. The projector fan became the loudest sound in the auditorium. Dana's hand remained on the podium, but her fingers had lost their color. Martin tried to speak. His mouth opened once before his voice arrived, dry and thin. "That file was obtained without authorization." The district auditor stepped to the microphone. "The file was recovered from the camera's protected local backup under a preservation order issued this afternoon. Its metadata matches the service log, the access card record, the remote microphone log, and the original server timestamps." He opened the sealed envelope. Inside were audit summaries from 3 earlier student cases. Each displayed the same pattern. An accommodation failed, a report was revised after hours, and responsibility was transferred to the student. Elaine Foster rose from her chair. She did not look toward the audience when she spoke. She looked at Lily. "The disciplinary finding against Lily Bennett is void, effective immediately. Her record will be corrected tonight. A written acknowledgement will be sent to her family and every staff member who received the false report." Lily's mother closed both hands around her daughters. Lily released a breath that seemed to have been held since the previous afternoon. Elaine continued, "Dana Whitmore and Martin Hale are placed on administrative leave pending independent investigation. Their system access is suspended now." 2 district security officers moved quietly to the side of the stage. There were no handcuffs, no shouting, no spectacle. Martin placed his access badge on the table. Dana stared at the darkened screen where her own face had been visible moments earlier. Her pen rolled from the podium, struck the stage, and spun in a slow circle before stopping beneath the blue spotlight. "I was trying to protect the program," she said. No one answered. Patricia Cole stood near the rear aisle, one hand pressed against her purse. The auditor turned toward her. "The donor committee communications will also be reviewed." She sat down without speaking. Elaine faced the audience. "Westbridge failed a student, then altered the record to make that student appear responsible for our failure. That is not a misunderstanding. It is a breach of trust." She ordered all disability-related disciplinary files from the previous 5 years preserved, all accommodation procedures independently reviewed, and every affected family contacted. Then she looked at Dan. "Mr. Mercer, the warning against you is withdrawn. Your actions preserved evidence this district was in danger of losing." 100 faces turned toward him. The same parents who had whispered about the janitor now waited for him to say something triumphant. Dan did not. He looked at Lily, then at Noah. His son's eyes were wet, but he was smiling for the first time that day. Dan placed his black notebook beside the silver hearing device and said, "She told the truth before any of us listened." The sentence crossed the auditorium without force, and still it seemed to reach every seat. Lily squeezed her mother's hand. Noah stepped closer to his father and leaned against his arm. The applause began somewhere in the back, uncertain at first, then spread through the room. Dan did not raise his hands or turn toward it. He watched as Elaine personally removed the false report from Lily's file and replaced it with a correction bearing the school seal. Justice had begun in public, but recognition could not return the hours Lily had spent doubting her own memory, or erase the fear Noah had carried while watching his father risk the job that kept their lights on. And when Elaine quietly asked Dan to help lead the district's new evidence and accessibility review, he looked at the silver device between them and understood that the next choice would decide whether this moment became only a scandal or the beginning of a school where the next child would not need a lost recording to be believed. The auditorium emptied slowly, without the noisy relief people usually carried after a public decision. Folding chairs scraped across the floor. Parents gathered coats and programs while avoiding the blue table beneath the stage light. Dana, Whitmore, and Martin Hale had already left through the side doors with district officials, their access badges sealed inside separate evidence envelopes. No one followed them. No one needed to. The system that had once protected their version of events had finally begun preserving the truth instead. Lily stood near the front row while her mother read the corrected disciplinary notice for the third time. The accusation had been removed. Her competition entry had been restored. An independent judge would review the project under the original rules, but Elaine Foster made one point clear. You do not have to return to that room until you feel ready. Lily touched the temporary hearing unit behind her ear. Will someone write the instructions next time? Elaine nodded. Every time. Dan waited near the aisle with his maintenance cart. The same cart that had looked out of place beside administrators now held the cracked ceiling tile he still intended to replace before morning. Noah leaned against its handle, turning Dan's old flashlight between both hands. You're really going back to work? He asked. There's still a hole upstairs. But everybody knows what you did. Dan took the flashlight and clipped it back onto his belt. The hole doesn't. Noah smiled despite himself. Near the stage, Elaine closed Lily's file and carried it personally to the records office. When she returned, she held no check, trophy, or ceremonial envelope. She placed Dan's warning notice in front of him, marked withdrawn and expunged. I owe you more than an apology, she said. Dan looked at the page. Lily does. Elaine accepted the correction without defending herself. She turned to Lily and her mother. I should have stopped the meeting the moment I saw the accommodation section was blank. I relied on titles instead of asking who had actually been heard. I am sorry. Lily studied her face before answering. Next time, ask me first. I will. Dan could have asked for Martin's job. He could have demanded Dana's dismissal before the investigation finished, or told the remaining parents exactly how quickly they had judged him by his uniform. Instead, he opened his black notebook and placed a short list on the edge of the blue table. Written instructions before disciplinary meetings. Automatic preservation of accessibility logs. Student advocates present before signatures. Camera backups protected from local deletion. Elaine read each line slowly. You'll join the review? She asked. Only if families are in the room, Dan said. Not just administrators. Agreed. And Lily is not the example you use in training unless she chooses to be. Elaine looked toward the girl. Agreed. The district later offered Dan a temporary advisory stipend, but the first change he cared about cost almost nothing. A week later, every conference room at Westbridge had a small whiteboard, printed communication cards, and a posted rule stating that no student would be asked to sign a report they could not fully access. The camera archive required 2 authorized approvals before footage could be removed. 3 earlier cases were reopened, and each family received the original drafts that had been hidden from them. Consequences moved through hearings, contracts, and formal findings rather than rumors. Dan never attended those meetings unless his evidence was needed. He had protected the truth. He did not need to watch it punish people. Lily returned to the competition room 2 weeks later. The blue table had been cleaned and placed beneath the window. Her model stood in the center, not because anyone gave her special treatment, but because the judges reviewed the work she had actually submitted. Before they began, Lily checked the written instructions taped beside the display. Then she looked toward Dan, who was tightening a loose hinge on the classroom door. It says blue table, she told him. I see that, he said. Noah sat on the floor nearby doing homework while he waited for his father's shift to end. Lily's project received an honorable mention. She folded the certificate into her backpack and seemed more interested in the small silver hearing device waiting inside a padded case. The district had repaired it, preserved the recording, and returned it only after Lily approved. What had once been treated like misplaced equipment was now the reason her own memory no longer felt like something adults could edit. She held the case out to Dan. "You found my voice." Dan shook his head. It was already there. Lily closed the case and held it against her chest. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The late sunlight crossed the blue table, touched Dan's worn toolbox, and warmed the scratches along its handle until they looked less like damage than proof of years spent repairing what others walked past. Noah slipped his hand into his father's. Lily's mother stood beside her daughter. Elaine remained in the doorway, silent enough to understand that respect was not something she could award after the fact. It was something institutions had to practice before the evidence forced them to. Dan picked up his toolbox, and the small silver device gave one soft connection tone from inside Lily's case. This time, no one mistook the sound for noise. Some truths never needed to shout. They only needed one person kind enough to keep them safe until the whole room was ready to listen.